Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Hayao Miyazaki's second feature film and one of his great classics. But let's be real, what isn't a classic by this man? Released in 1984, Nausicaa would be the film that would assemble the key founders of Studio Ghibli and pave the way for the studio's establishment. The film takes place in a post-apocalyptic world 1,000 years in the future after an event called the 7 Days of Fire destroys civilization. Humanity has reached the brink of extinction and is scattered throughout areas remaining untouched by the Sea of Decay, a toxic jungle that has engulfed most of the world. We follow Nausicaa, the princess of the Valley of the Wind, as she tries to prevent mankind from destroying the world and themselves even further. Before I go on, I do want to warn that I will give minor spoilers, but nothing crucial, so if you haven't seen this yet, there's nothing major to worry about. Now with that out of the way, let's talk some Nausicaa. When starting my Ghibli journey, this was the film I began with, as I went by order of release. I mean, technically I'd seen Kiki's and Spirited Away before Nausicaa, but I wasn't really familiar with what Ghibli was yet. And also technically this isn't even a Ghibli film. But everybody calls it one, so whatever. This would end up being one of my favorite Miyazaki films. From the dieselpunk aesthetics, Joe Hisaishi's amazing soundtrack, and the timeless animation, Nausicaa instantly drew me in. Honestly, I don't think the story is anything groundbreaking, but I think it works. In the usual Miyazaki fashion, the film explores themes such as the destruction of war and environmental awareness, which both are still very much relevant to this day. What really captivated me though was the world that Nausicaa presents. If you're familiar with Miyazaki's other films, then you know he does a lot of this thing called soft world building. What I mean by that is, he creates these mysterious and magical worlds but only gives us a small taste of them. We never really get to see how these worlds work or what more lies within them. Instead, we are left to our own imaginations, which in a way adds to the wonder of these films. But this is where Nausicaa differs from the rest. I think Miyazaki does his most world building in Nausicaa. He creates a world where mankind has reverted back to kingdoms and empires. Giant insects dominate the lands, and technology seems to have restarted somewhat, having some people resort back to swords and draw animals. Despite this, it's still not as much world building as we get from some other films, but I felt like there was too much setup for there not to be more beyond what we are given. That's when I learned that Nausicaa was originally a manga. And then I ignored it for like 5 years. Look, back then I was not that keen on reading. I thought, why read something when you could just watch it? Although as the years went by, I started opening up to reading a little more, and eventually it led me getting into manga. That's when I realized that this is probably the best time for me to read Nausicaa, so I ordered a box set and took a crack at it. Being a slow reader, it took me like 5 months to read it all. But I gotta say, the manga hits different.
ユパ様、これは旅の途中で不吉な噂を聞いた。ペジテ氏の地下に眠っていた旧世界の怪物が掘り出されたというのだ。
So before I go into the manga, I wanted to give you guys a sneak peek of the manga. Originally, the manga was released in 7 individual volumes, but what I have right here is what they call the Deluxe Edition. And what the Deluxe Edition does is it takes all 7 volumes and condenses it into 2 hardcover books. It's still the complete story, so no worries there. You also get this neat little poster. A double-sided poster. So what I really like about this edition of the manga, I don't know if the original volumes have this, but for one, you get these little pictures. But this right here is what I really like. You get a map of the entire setting of Nausicaa. What I really appreciate about this is it gives you more context of where things are going on. So like in the film, most of the events are going on right here where the Valley of the Wind and Pejai are. They mention the Kingdom of Toromechia, but you know, you don't really get to see it. But what the film left out is all this, which is the Dorok territories. The second book has something similar. You get more pictures. I think these pictures were originally the cover arts for the volumes. Something I wanted to point out real quick is in the manga, it seems that Kushana is blonde, while in the film she has red hair. But you also get another map of all the stuff that's going on right so far in the story. And then you also get notes on the Sea of Decay. You know, here's the fungi that grows in the Sea of Decay. But yeah, this is the Nausicaa manga. I know in situations like this one, the original source is always going to be more fleshed out. I do believe that the film has its own merits, but I can't help but compare it to the manga. You can still of course enjoy the film without reading the manga. In fact, I think you should watch the film before reading it. I know, it's weird because you usually read something before watching it, but I think this is one of those rare cases where you should do the opposite. While the stories between the two are similar, they're different enough to where you can enjoy them separately, and if you end up really liking the film, then dive right on into the manga. The manga gave me what I was looking for and more. We see the world that Miyazaki had in mind but was unable to entirely showcase in the film. When the film was first being produced, there were only 16 chapters to what was obviously an unfinished story. To cope with this, Miyazaki chose to alter the story a bit so that it would be a complete film. The film was made to have a much simpler plot and goes in a different direction at some point. Even so, after reading the manga, I could spot some allusions to the grander scheme of the story within the film, namely Nausicaa's powers and the purpose of the Sea of Decay. Some aspects were entirely left out, such as the Doroks, the war between the Doroks and Toromekians, Kushana's development, and a handful of other characters. Kushana is also missing an arm in the film, a decision I think was done to give her more motivation in the movie. One of the biggest differences between the manga and the film is how much darker and bleak the manga can be. It's nothing over the top, perhaps on the same level as Princess Mononoke, if not more, although it is noticeable when you put them side by side. The themes presented in the film are also explored much more in the manga. Miyazaki fully displays the horrors of war, the suffering it causes, and how it can affect an environment. Not only that, but the Nausicaa manga also goes into the concepts of human nature and the influence of religion, at least that's what I took from it. Something else I greatly admired is the art of the manga. Miyazaki put a lot of thought and detail into these panels throughout the story, which I think adds to the atmosphere and tone. It gives a sense of how gritty and rough this world is. Sometimes it is a little hard to make out what is going on in some panels, but I eventually learned how to look at it. If that makes sense. My favorite panels were the grand establishing shots that showcased the scale of an area, and the close-ups of the characters' faces, which amplified their emotions. Even though this manga is relatively short compared to most other manga, it still took Miyazaki 12 years to finish. It ran from 1982 to 1994, serialized by Japanese magazine Animage. Speaking of which, this year is the 40th anniversary of the manga. I mean, one can imagine why it took him so long to finish, working at Ghibli and all. Along with that, Miyazaki was very meticulous when it came to the art. In the end, this would end up being one of his best works in my opinion. We can see how this manga had influenced Miyazaki's later works as well, as the first film he worked on, after Nausicaa's completion, was Princess Mononoke, which had similar ideas and concepts. Following films would also touch upon related themes.
君はあなたは殺しすぎる。もう光玉も虫笛も弾かない。
I doubt Ghibli will ever go back to Nausicaa, but I would love to see an animated series covering the full story or something of the likes. I think it could be something really great, but like I said, it's unlikely that'll happen. Which I think is even more reason to read the manga. So if you love the Nausicaa film and have the means to read the manga, then I highly recommend giving it a shot. It's surely a story worth looking at. Okay, bye.